guys, welcome to Parawomenradio. I'm Amy.
Carefully strumming this old guitar, words rolling out into the fire. Never ask why my heart burned blue. Here in the haze where you inspire me. Here in the darkness I hear my cue. Time to find some solitude. Here where my soul bleeds openly, deep in the heart of sin and you. Here in the blue, I'm falling deep into you. Here in the blue, I'm dancing with you tonight, and it feels fine. Carefully strumming this old guitar again, words rolling out into our fire. If heaven had wings, I would steal them and fly away with you for a while. Here in the essence of gratitude, your dreamy little smile on my lips. I miss my cue, but baby, I had you. Miss my cue, but I had you for that day.
Here in the essence of gratitude, I've always got my power crew, whether you're with me or in my replay mode. You know, I've always got you. Okay, so we are coming into day 2 of the Gregg trial afternoon. But, you know, maybe did I get my times mixed up? I could have. Because I did. Okay, so they said they were coming back 1:30. Man, wait, no, they wouldn't take a lunch from 12. No. What time did they say they were coming back? I think I came back too soon, but that's fine. I can play some of the old footage from yesterday and today. So this is the Gregg trial. She's a 14-year-old. She's now 15, who her friends told her mother that she was using substances, and the mother worked at the school that Carly went to, and on the ride home, nobody knows what happened, but once they got home, Carly went in and got a weapon and unalived her mother in the head 3 times. So she's on trial for this, and this happened in Mississippi. I feel like with the rise, I mean, matricide seems to be on the rise, thanks to Gypsy Rose. Thanks, Gypsy Rose. Matricide is on the rise. My door to my dryer isn't shutting properly. Thanks, Gypsy Rose. I'm going to blame everything on Gypsy Rose. That's what we do over here. I stubbed my toe. Gosh, darn it, Gypsy Rose. All right, so they put mayonnaise on my hamburger. Thanks, Gypsy Rose. All right, let's get back into the case. But first I want to kind of investigate. And all right, so it is now 1:43, so it's 12:43 in Mississippi. So they're probably coming back at 1. So I'm probably just 15 minutes early. Okay, so I thought it would be interesting. I did a live on this, talking about an introduction to the case and how I felt like it tied back to the Gypsy Rose case. And so I thought we'd watch a little bit of it. And I've got a little bird with me today. Daytime lives come with a little bird. Nothing I can do. Little bird lives in the house. So let's do that. And let me get it together. It's the story of my life. Let me get it together. Say that to myself constantly. Let me get it together. We'll just share this and then I'll get you to the right page. Okay. We did this like last Wednesday. The whole reason I am doing this case is because it's a matricide case, and I feel like Gypsy Rose is the queen of matricide. So, guys, welcome to Parawomenradio. I'm Amy. Do you believe Gypsy Rose Blanchard is sending a dark and tragic message to our youth? One of the reasons I'm so deeply invested in covering the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case is because I fear that the act of unaliving one's own parent may be seen as a viable solution to dealing with troublesome family members and or as a means to obtain wealth to our youth today. It may sound utterly absurd, but unfortunately, that is a concern that plagues my mind in today's society. Thanks, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Tonight, let's explore the chilling story of Carly Gregg. At just 14 years old, Carly ended her mother's life and attempted to do the same to her stepfather. However, her stepfather managed to thwart her deadly plan through, well, I guess just by surviving. And so join me as we delve into the dark and twisted world of Carly Gregg and Gypsy Rose Blanchard on tonight's episode of Parawomenradio. The shocking truth behind these heinous acts will keep us, might keep you up at night, especially if you have children. And I hate to say that, I truly do. I mean, we should feel safe in our own home. Our home should be our safe haven from the outside world, not from what's inside of it. While we wait for the rest of the power crew to arrive, I think they might be back in session. Let me get us over there.
Training is required to become a law enforcement officer first?
Well, you have to complete the basic police officers course. There are multiple taught in the state of Mississippi. You can go through the Tupelo Police Academy. They have their own. The Jackson Police Academy has their own. The Southern Regional Public Safety Institute, which is the one that I went to, was at one point in time combined with the Harrison County Law Enforcement Training Academy because it had essentially been demolished during Katrina. And so it was relocated to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And Harrison County has since kind of restarted their own. You can go to the Mississippi Law Enforcement Training Academy right over here in Pearl. And then, of course, there's the Mississippi Highway Patrol Academy. They kind of put on their own, but it's a state accredited course that if a trooper decides that he no longer wishes to be a member of the Highway Patrol, he can always use that as a lateral into a sheriff's office, police department, under the state agency.
And particularly, I'm interested in what you did. So you told us that you went to which academy?
Yes, ma'am. So I started off at the Southern Regional Public Safety Institute. Like I said, I've had a lot of training over the years. Initially, I had a lot of training related to the patrol side of law enforcement, so to speak. You know, uniformed officers riding around in a marked patrol car, patrolling neighborhoods, enforcing traffic laws and things along those lines. A lot of that particular type of training was impaired driving enforcement, counter drug related stuff, some drug investigations as far as trafficking and things along those lines. The most recently, I guess more recently, I had some internal affairs training. I'm a certified polygraph examiner with the state of Mississippi. I'm a certified criminal investigator. The state of Mississippi actually has a program that criminal investigators can go through. It's taught out at the Mississippi Law Enforcement Training Academy in Pearl. And it's essentially I think it's 320 classroom hours. And then there is the difference, I think, is 80 hours of hands-on instruction. Essentially, you're kind of going out and you're taking latent fingerprints off objects, and you're rolling car tires to get tire impressions. You're taking dental stone, and you're taking all of the investigative resources that you need to in order to take tire wear impressions and footwear impressions. You're doing digital evidence extractions from phones, and you're going through and you're drafting search warrants. You're learning about death investigations. You're learning about kind of what particular changes that the body goes through as we pass away, and you're going through different things that you can look for in order to determine, okay, we have a crime here, or we don't have a crime here, and so that was definitely one course that I've been through here lately. But I've had some other training, counterterrorism and SWAT, special response team stuff, and tactics and things along those lines. But that's, in a nutshell, that's generally it.
In the training that you've had and in your 14 years in law enforcement experience, have you had the opportunity to investigate or be on the scene of murders?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that prior to March 19th of 2024?
Correct.
I want to ask you specifically about the Rankin County Sheriff's Department. So we heard from Deputy Lewis earlier about the fact that he wears a body cam when he's dealing with the public.
Correct.
What is the policy for investigators and body cams back in March of 24?
The investigators in my division did not have body cameras in March of 2024.
What about as we sit here today? Do you have them now?
We are starting to trickle them in, and by trickle, what I mean is that the criminal investigators that I work alongside with, and I guess I should try and explain this. So the criminal investigator division not only houses the criminal investigators, people that investigate, the theft and the violent crimes and the fraud and all of those things, but it also houses our drug investigators. We have prescription fraud investigators that essentially work on pharmaceutical diversion, investigators that investigate street drug related crimes, the sale of fentanyl and the sale of marijuana and the sale of methamphetamines and things along those lines. But we also have our interdiction investigators, guys that are essentially working on drug trafficking organizations and things like that. So those narcotics investigators is kind of the loose term for those different identities of investigators. Those have their body cameras they all have them now. So before, the street drug investigators and the pharmaceutical diversion investigators did not have them. They do now. And so our interdiction guys have them, the narcotics guys have them, but we are still kind of acquiring them piece by piece as we are able, as the sheriff's office is able to obtain the resources either through budget appropriation or grant funding in order to continue to buy body cameras for our division.
Investigator Brunell, I want to take you back to March the 19th of 2024. Were you, in fact, working at the Sheriff's Department at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen if you worked a call at 214 Ashton Way that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Walk us through your first involvement with that call that was made out to 911.
So we were going back to that date. We were actually in trial that week, working on another case with I believe it was Mr. Smith was involved in that one as well. But I had left the courthouse, went to my office, and essentially obtained my belongings, which is essentially just a backpack that I towed all my stuff in. But acquired that, got in my vehicle, and started heading to my residence. And my police radio is on, and the volume up, and I overhear our 911 dispatcher asking that that the units that work the north end of our county, which is essentially like anything north of I-20 or Highway 80, asking for the north units to be en route to 214 Ashton Way. And this was a female dispatcher, that a disturbance had taken place, and there was a possible shooting involved. So, of course, knowing that our division will eventually be involved in that particular incident, I activated my emergency equipment and drove to the scene, and was the first investigator there. And basically, once I got there, I noticed that deputies Hunter Lewis and Dustin Smith had already arrived. They're assigned to the patrol division, and medical personnel had also arrived on scene already.
And the medical personnel, is that separate from the Sheriff's Department?
That's correct. So in the county, especially around the reservoir area, we tap into the fire protection for the cities very, very minutely, but we also have the Reservoir Fire Department, which responds to a lot of the fire and emergency related medical incidents in the unincorporated part of the county.
On this particular day, what information had you been provided kind of before you walk into, because we've actually seen some body cam footage where you walk up to the scene. At that point, what did you know had happened?
So I walk up to the scene. Pafford is loading a white male who was later identified as Heath Smiley. Our dispatcher had stated that his daughter had shot him, killed his wife, and then fled, which is the radio traffic that I'm hearing on the radio prior to getting to the scene. And so I have real general information and not really specific details. So I go to Deputy Lewis, I go to Hunter, and simply ask him what he's got. And then he begins to fill me in on the specific details related to kind of why we're there, what has transpired, what information he's been able to get from Mr. Smiley, anything along those lines.
Do you recall around what time you got the call or that you went out to the house?
It was shortly after 5 o'clock, 5:06, 5:07, somewhere around in there.
Nighttime?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Afternoon, right. I'm sorry.
When you arrived on the scene, where was Carly Gregg?
She was not there.
Did law enforcement know where she was at that time?
No, ma'am.
When you go into the house, kind of walk us through what you're doing and what you're assessing at that time.
So and this will be kind of hitting the fast forward button a little bit. So there are a couple of things that transpire after I make contact with Hunter. I provide him some information in order to get an incident log started, a crime scene log, crime scene integrity sheet, what have you, and essentially get my camera. And then our investigators I can hear them on the radio coming en route, so to speak, and basically informing our dispatcher that they're en route to the scene. And as that is beginning to happen, I simply take my camera, get some gloves, and because the gloves are, regardless of whether or not people think about it, gloves are they're important. They're a big thing when it comes to crime scenes. We have touch DNA in our skin. Believe it or not, skin cells come off of our hands, regardless of whether or not we know it, and we leave those, we transfer those on different surfaces and things along those lines. And so gloves are an important thing when it comes to crime scenes. And so I obtained a pair of gloves, got my camera, and then essentially begin to try and photograph the residents. Start on the outside, and then work from the outside in. And basically, we're just trying to document and preserve the house the way it is, as we find it, so to speak.
Investigator Burnell, I want to take a step back. You mentioned something about setting up a crime scene log. Can you explain to ladies and gentlemen what that means and why that's important?
So when I got there, the Deputy Lewis had facilitated the putting up of the tape, the cliche, the crime scene tape that that most people see on television and stuff like that. Well, what you may not see is a crime scene log. So it's essentially a document, a landscaped piece of paper that's got a bunch of lines on it. It's got a name, a place for an agency, the time in, time out, and purpose for scene on some of them. It's essentially to document the comings and goings of everybody on that particular scene, whether or not you're a law enforcement officer, you're a coroner, you are a medical member of the medical personnel, whether or not you're fire, paramedic, so on and so forth.
During the time that you have a crime scene taped off and you're doing this log, is anyone other than first responders and law enforcement, and I'm including the coroner in that, allowed in that crime scene?
No, ma'am.
I want to talk to you. You talked about gloves, and I know that when we watched that video, Deputy Lewis did not have gloves on when he first went to the house. I mean, y'all don't drive around in your patrol car with gloves on, right?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
And so when you were on patrol, I mean, initially when you come out to a shooting call, what is your main goal at that point?
Irrespective of any type of call, our first priority when it comes to law enforcement is the preservation of life. If I leave today and God forbid come upon some scene or something like that where somebody is in dire need of emergency medical help, I'm not going back to get my gloves. Like you begin to administer first aid regardless of that, and then we'll deal with the consequences and repercussions after the fact. Like we have to be able to preserve life. That is our number one priority, and then everything else falls secondary and tertiary and so on and so forth to that.
I want to talk a little bit more in a minute about your processing of the scene, but I also want to talk about, I mean, when you arrived there, what did you learn? You said you later learned that Heath Smiley was the man on the front porch.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
What was his condition?
He had sustained a single gunshot wound, I believe. So it would be his right and our left shoulder had a through and through gunshot wound to the left upper torso. I guess we can say it that way.
And what about was there someone else in the home when you went there?
There were no other living people inside the home whenever I got there. The body of Ashley Smiley was found in a room that was later determined to be controlled and normally occupied by Carly Madison Gregg.
In the course of your investigation, did you prepare a layout of the Smiley household?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
May I approach the insurance? I've handed you a piece of paper. Could you take a look at that and tell me what that is?
So it's a very general, non-scale layout of the Smiley home, Smiley residence at 214 Ashton Way.
And is this a document that you prepared?
Correct.
And what were you using this document for?
Essentially, we were using it for courtroom purposes. I mean, at the end of the day, like I know what the house looks like. You all don't know what the house looks like. You're not there. I can give you pictures of the best pictures in the world of a crime scene. But at the end of the day, if you can't look at it visually and kind of see how I move from room to room, taking those photographs and essentially kind of see the layout of the home, whenever you're hearing 911 calls or you're hearing us talk about different things on the scene or you're hearing us discuss search warrants or something like that during the testimony phase, where you won't really be able to know where we are or where my mind is as I recollect that.
And is that a true and accurate copy of the layout that you prepared in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, we'd ask that this be marked as state's next exhibit. I believe it's 11.
Any objection?
No objection. Yeah, that's 11 all purposes.
Investigator Burnell, you talked about that you go through and your initial thing that you do on the scene, besides of course assessing where the two people are, is taking photographs, documenting that evidence.
Yes, ma'am.
You said you documented the outside of the home.
Correct.
Did you also document any telephones in that house?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that.
So essentially when I finish taking my exterior pictures, move up to the threshold of the house, which I'm gonna see if I can spin around a little bit. So essentially I'm finishing up. This is north. This is generally going to be east. That's generally west. And of course this is generally south. So we get to the threshold of the house and essentially start taking pictures in almost a 360 pattern. Okay, so we're going to take as many photographs overlapping each frame as we go, and until we cover all of this room. Go inside, close the door, and then grab the area that we couldn't get because the door's open, of course. And then we're going to photograph all of that too. And that's kind of systematically going through and trying to clear or document or photograph each room in the house.
I want to, may I approach the witness room? I've handed you two photos.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you identify, or could you look at those and tell me what's in those photographs?
So essentially your first shot as an investigator when you get on scene needs to be of the front of the house. We typically like to have the mailbox in it, or at least some markings on the front of the house. That way it's readily identifiable as, well, this was 214 Ashton Way, and not 215, 213, 221 or anything along those lines. I know that all these photographs are from 214 Ashton Way, from this photograph until the last one. So the next photograph, whenever we entered in through that threshold I told you about a second ago from the living room, there is a let's call it a small entertainment center. It's about knee high. It's wooden. It's about the same color as this banister in front of you all, and it essentially has two phones on it. So this black phone and this white phone. So the white phone was later determined to be the property of Ashley Smiley. And the black phone over here on the left was later determined to be the phone of belonging to Carly Madison Gregg.
Investigator Brunel, do those appear to be true and accurate copies of two of the photographs that you took on that day?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we'd ask that these be moved into evidence as the state's next exhibit.
Any objection? No objection. Front of the house will be marked as 12. The other one will be marked as 13.
Permission to approach the witness room. if you would take a look at those and just let me know when you finish looking at them.
Okay, ma'am.
Did those appear to also be a true and accurate copy of some of the pictures that you took from the crime scene that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Are those particular pictures, I'm not asking you to describe them to the jury yet, but
Yes, ma'am.
could you tell me generally what are those photographs? What
So
are they
the-
of?
So the first one on top is a nylon single strap retention holster that was located on the bed in the master bedroom, which is believed to have been occupied and controlled by Heath Smiley and Ashley Smiley. The second photograph is the countertop in the kitchen of the residence that basically depicts some clothing, a scarf, and a winter wear jacket, a .357 silver revolver handgun, and then that is I guess a large scale, a wide frame photo. And then the next one is a medium frame photo showing the same handgun. And then the next photograph is a serial number image of the same handgun I just described to you. So now you can see it's a Taurus .357 Magnum handgun revolver. The last photograph are 6 cartridges and one live .38 special round that were recovered from that particular silver revolver.
Those are photographs that were taken from the scene on March the 19th, 2024.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that
Yes,
a
ma'am.
true and accurate copy of those photographs?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, we'd ask that those be marked as state's next exhibit.
Any objection? No objection. First one with the holster will be S14. Second one, medium frame, will be S15. And serial number will be S16. You can move carries out, Molly. Is there one more? 2 more? Those will be more S17, S18. You may proceed.
Investigator Burnell, as you were making your way through the house, were there, other than the murder weapon, were there other guns that you documented within the Smiley residence?
Yes, ma'am.
And where were they located?
They were in the master bedroom, master closet.
Permission to approach witness, Your Honor? You'll just take a look at those for me.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Detective Burnell, do those appear to be the, or what generally are those in those photographs?
The first 2 photographs, one is a close-up image of a pump master, a 760 pump master. It looks like a pellet rifle or a BB gun. The third photograph is a camouflage shotgun, and then the last photograph is an AR style platform rifle.
Are those true and accurate copies of photographs that you took from the crime scene?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, we'd ask that those be marked as a composite exhibit, just with the other guns located in the house.
Any objection?
Just clarification, you said there's 3 photos again.
Yeah, there's 4 photographs. 3 different guns, but 4 photographs.
Any objection to any of the 4 photos?
No objection.
All right, they'll be admitted S19, S20, S21, and S22.
Investigator Burnell, did you also photograph inside the bedroom of Heath and Ashley Smiley?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there a desk located in that room?
Yes, ma'am.
Permission to approach witness, Your Honor? I've handed you 2 photographs. If you would look at those for me.
Yes, ma'am.
If you could generally tell me what those photographs are.
So the first photograph is of the desk at a wide angle. It shows 2 computers. Looks like some sort of a knitting bag or something along those lines. In the chair behind the knitting, or in between the chair back and the knitting bag, are some boxes that are revealed in the next photograph, which are some essentially they appear to be THC boxes, empty boxes for THC vape pens. And then there is a like a Leatherman multi-tool.
And how many of the vape pen boxes are there?
There are 4. I'm sorry.
All right, we'd ask that those be marked as the state's next exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection.
I'll be admitted all purposes. That's next in number. Was that next thing? All right, you can proceed.
Secretary Burnell, looking at the layout, and I apologize, I don't have that exhibit number that you prepared. There's a dining room and sort of a kitchen area that are open. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Were there any doors that lead to the outside near the dining area?
Yes, ma'am. So there is, generally speaking, there is almost like a shotgun style door from the front door through to the door that in the dining area that led to the backyard of the residence.
And did you also take pictures of that doorway?
Yes, ma'am.
Permission to approach.
Yes, ma'am.
I handed you 2 photographs, Investigator Burnell. If you could take a look at those for me, please.
Okay.
Could you tell me what's reflected in that first picture?
So the first photograph is a essentially it depicts the dining area table where the Smileys and Miss Gregg may have eaten a meal. In the corner of that room, there is a black dog kennel. I'm assuming for the 2 golden retrievers that they had. And there's a white cord hanging down from the wall near the corner of the room. The second photograph is of the back door itself, and it's essentially just the back door.
And where does that back door lead?
Into the backyard, which kind of encompasses the house itself. Makes kind of an L shape, as you can see via the scale drawing. So it makes an L shape, and so the backyard simply makes the corresponding L.
Are those true and accurate copies of some of the photographs that you took from the crime scene on March 19, 2024?
Yes, ma'am.
I would ask that those be marked as the state's next exhibits.
Any objection? No objection. The one described as the dining table will be S25. And the one described as the photo of the door will be S26.
Investigator, now before we move on to any other pictures, I want to ask you about that S25,
Okay.
The cord that's hanging from there.
Yes,
In processing the crime scene, did you have any idea what that cord went to?
I did not. It's a USB-C cable. From my recollection, I didn't know exactly what it went to at the time. We hypothesized that it was part of some home surveillance system.
As you sit here today, do you know what was plugged into that cord?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was that?
It was a WISE home surveillance system camera that was recovered after the 19th.
Thank you. Did you also photograph throughout the home, the laundry room area?
Yes, ma'am.
Permission to approach witness, Your Honor? I handed you actually a stack of photos. If you want to take a look at those, please.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Do those appear to be true and accurate copies of some of the photographs that you took from the crime scene on March the 19th, 2024?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's of the laundry room area?
So the initial photograph on top is it's kind of like a transitional photograph from the kitchen area into that laundry room. But yes, ma'am.
Or we'd ask that those be marked as state's next exhibits.
They'll be moved in next to number. How many do we have? You just tell me how many. What they're marked. Seven. Those have been marked S27 through S34.
I want to come back to those, Investigator Brunel, but I
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
get through some of the other photographs that you took. Did you also go into or the defendant's bedroom and photograph the deceased victim, Ashley Smiley?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President. You want to take a look at those photographs?
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Do they appear to be accurate copies of some of the photographs that you took from the crime scene on March 19, 2024?
Yes, ma'am.
And those are of the defendants, the transition into the bedroom, and then of the deceased victim, Ashley Smiley.
That's correct.
Now we'd ask that those be marked state's next exhibit.
No objection.
Mark them numerically, sequentially, and give me the numbers. We admitted 35 through 37.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Investigator Brunel, so again, what is the reason for documenting the crime scene?
Essentially, so that way we can preserve the way it was whenever we arrived on scene. The photographs and the body worn camera recordings are a great way to do that.
Do things get moved once you start processing the scene?
Of course. For instance, in this case, initially, so when, as I said before, like preservation of life is our first responsibility. In preparing for this trial today, this week, I had the occasion to look at body worn camera video evidence. When Deputy Lewis goes into the house to check on the victim, he tries to see if there are any signs of life. He's touching her arms and he's lifting up the towel that was placed upon her head. And he's essentially trying to see if there's any way to save this young lady. And of course, then right after him, the fire department comes in, does essentially the same thing. They're placing leads to see if there's any heart rate activity, and so they're moving her arms from the position in which they were placed on her torso. They're lifting up the towel that was placed on her head that would have been replaced by Deputy Lewis. And so there are things getting moved around. And so taking the photographs and trying to preserve the way that the crime scene was at that time is a very important and a very vital function of crime scene processing. The other aspect is, so during active scenes like that, where you essentially have some like a quasi-active shooter type situation, you are in a situation where you don't know where the suspect is. They're not readily apparent. They're hiding in the linen closet. Did they pull down the attic ladder and they're hiding upstairs? Like, are they hiding under a bed or something like that? So when officers are going through systematically trying to clear and make sure that we're not walking into an ambush or walking into a situation where now we are about to sustain more casualties as a result of this one defendant, things get moved. We have had situations in previous cases where shell casings have been in the roadway after drive-by shootings. Well, cars don't stop just because there's shell casings in the roadway. They get run over all the time. So recording those with photographs and body-worn camera videos and things along those lines is a lot of times our best way to preserve kind of how they were prior to those disturbances.
May I break something, Sean? Is it all right if I have questions from here for a while? I want to point you to, or I'll just look at the exhibits and then I'll ask Mr. Burnell about them. That's okay, Burnell. I'm looking at exhibit 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. That's okay, Burnell. It appears that you're taking photographs of the wall, the sheetrock in the wall, as well as the door leading into the garage. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen why you thought it was important to document that?
So leading the transition from the kitchen into the laundry room area right here, or the mud room and laundry room type of situation in this house, you can clearly see a dot in the middle of the doorway there, which is of course the door's open. So there's clearly a defect in that wall. It's not how it came from the manufacturer. Something made that defect. And so as we continue into that room, so this is a more medium scale drawing, a more medium scale photograph where you can actually see the dot, the defect a little bit more defined. And so skipping ahead a little bit, so number 33 is actually an up close image of what that defect looks like. And you'll see, let me go back wide. So you'll see the bag. Okay, so there's a piece of the wall. If I just take a picture of a white wall, it's going to be very hard for you to maintain reference. So the yellow bag that's also next to this defect is in that medium scale drawing, or the medium scale photograph, and then it's in the up close photograph. That way it helps us maintain reference throughout, because we took hundreds of pictures of this house and the crime scene within. And so we can clearly see now the up close photograph of that defect in the wall. And so that's more or less kind of the reason for doing it in that fashion, is so that way we can record those defects. Because at the end of the day, I'm not a ballistics expert. I can only call the holes defects. I can say that they are in a layman's terms, they are what would appear to be similar to a hole that a bullet would make if it went through a similar object. But it is essentially just a defect in a wall, and that is how they are classified in my report. That is how they are classified as we process the crime scene itself.
Later in your investigation, what did you learn occurred in that laundry room?
After we had the opportunity to obtain some information from Mr. Smiley. We learned that he had come home, and of course, this is kind of a culmination of things, not just the interview with him, but also the viewing of a surveillance camera that was positioned in approximately the same area as the garage door opener. When Mr. Smiley arrives home, the garage door's up, and he enters through. He enters the residence through that particular method, and so. Sorry, I'm looking for number 11. And so when he enters the residence, there it is. So he enters through this carport right here. Okay, so there's a storage room door right there, utility closet, what have you. And so he enters the laundry room right here, and then according to him, he later stated that Miss Gregg essentially lie in wait at the door, this door right here. So there's a door right here, a door that goes across into the corresponding carport. And so you essentially have Miss Gregg lie in wait here. And as soon as he comes into the mud room, shuts the door, he's immediately met with gunfire. And we would later learn through some interviews, there were 3 shots fired. And then of course you can note 3 different defects. The one I just showed you a minute ago in the wall next to the yellow bag, so to speak. There's another defect. This is in the door itself, down next to the bottom. It's a, for lack of a better term, like a 4-panel door. It's got four little panels. For lack of a better term, 4 little panels. It's a metal door with essentially like a foam innard. And there is a defect down in the bottom, one of the bottom panels of the door, and then there's a defect in the wall behind the door, illustrating that the door was closed at the time that the round was fired, or that the defect was made. I'm sorry.
In processing this scene, you photographed it. Did you ever take any items into evidence?
Yes, ma'am. Multiple items of evidence. If you would like me to go into those, so we, as I was initially arriving on scene, Pafford, the ambulance service, was preparing to transport Mr. Smiley to the emergency room at Baptist Hospital. In order to evaluate the severity of the gunshot wound he had sustained in his upper torso, they essentially had removed his upper garment. He is a healthcare worker, so essentially it was a scrub top and a t-shirt and an undershirt. So they had essentially taken those off and discarded them on the front patio to the house. So essentially you have a front patio right here, which I'm sure is depicted very well in the photographs and in the body-worn camera video. But the shirt is discarded right here by the ambulance service. That was later collected by us, as well as Mr. Smiley's bottoms once he got to the hospital. With regard to the laundry room and the carport area itself, so we were able to later find that there was a projectile. Again, I'm not a ballistics expert or anything along those lines, but a projectile that seemingly lines up with the defect that we have here on State's Exhibit 32 in the lower part of that door. Went down into, it struck the carport floor, went into a rolled up carpet, and then essentially came to final rest in front of a blue Chevrolet Traverse, I believe is what it was. That was essentially Ashley Smiley's primary vehicle. That particular projectile came to rest right in front of the passenger side door, approximately. The defect that I was telling you about a second ago with the yellow bag exited out that wall and then struck the cargo rack of the same SUV, essentially fragmented. Almost, and then pieces of it were recovered at the back driver's side corner of that particular vehicle. So those were 2 partial in part or whole projectiles that we recovered.
Detective Burnell, if I may interrupt
Yes,
you
ma'am.
for a moment,
Sorry.
did you collect those and store those pieces of evidence separately?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Permission to approach to insurance. Permission to approve the sentence.
He's not required to have anything else. He can.
Sure, talk about what's in. Yes, sir. If you can, I handed you one box to
Okay.
begin with.
Okay.
Without opening that, can you tell the jurors what that is?
So this is it's essentially what we would call like a bullet box, so to speak. It's a very loose general term. It's got a piece of cotton or a piece of fabric in the bottom of it to essentially keep the bullet from rubbing around and things like that. But it is marked P2 or projectile 2. It is marked with the date, and which was 3/20 of 2024, because by the time we concluded our on-scene investigation, got everything back to the sheriff's office and started doing our crime scene, our evidence log and logging everything in, we had crossed midnight. So it's got 3/20 of 24 on it, my initials, and then our sheriff's office evidence custodian has a barcode that he prints off and affixes to every piece of evidence we have. So that way it's a scan and go type of situation where if I need to log it out, carry it to the crime lab, he can scan my name, scan the piece of evidence, and it's logged out to me, and vice versa. So when we take evidence back from the crime lab, it's scanned in and then scanned my name, and it's checked back into evidence.
Does that appear to be unaltered in any way since the time that you removed that item?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Or we ask that be marked as the state's next exhibit.
Any objection? Head it to the court. The state's next number be marked S38.
Permission to approach to insurance. Investigator Burnell, I handed you another box. If you could take a look at that and see if you can identify that for me.
So this is, of course, the other one, P2. In the description on the box, it says projectile on ground, RAX 0438 front of vehicle. So this would have been the nearly intact projectile that we recovered from the front of the blue SUV that was actually Smiley's primary vehicle. So the P1, this box that I was just provided, has projectile on ground, RAX 0438 rear of vehicle. So this is the partial projectile that we recovered, the fragmented projectile that we recovered, driver's side rear corner of that same vehicle that essentially had exited through the wall next to the yellow bag, or what we believe exited through the wall next to the yellow bag.
Does that appear to be unaltered in any way from when you removed it from the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, we'd ask that be marked as state's next exhibit.
Any objection? Be marked S39 all purposes.
Investigator Burnell, y'all also recovered the live round and the empty shell casings, and those were also boxed up and put into evidence. Is that right?
That's correct.
What about the murder weapon? Can you tell us when you walked into the house where that was located?
It was on the countertop in the kitchen, as identified in the photograph.
During your course of investigation, how did you learn that that was the gun that was used to shoot Ashley Smiley?
So when Deputy Lewis initially arrived on scene, Mr. Smiley told him that the gun she had used was on the countertop, that he had opened the cylinder. There was one live round, six empty cartridges in the cylinder.
So you were in your course of investigation, did you learn that the same gun was used to shoot Keith Smiley that was also used to kill Ashley Smiley?
That is correct. So later on in the investigation, we received a crime lab report from the Mississippi Crime Lab in Pearl, Mississippi, that identified projectiles recovered from the body of Ashley Smiley were similar in characteristic and in nature to the firearm we recovered from the countertop of the kitchen in the Smiley residence. There was also a report from the Mississippi Crime Lab in Pearl, Mississippi, that identified a DNA swabs that.
Approach. What's the objection?
It's just we're making an objection. He's talking about documents that aren't in evidence.
Sustained.
Investigator Brunel, who relayed to law enforcement that the gun found at the home was used by Carly Smiley? Carly Gregg.
Heath Smiley told us that that's the one that she had used.
Permission to correct you, Sean? I handed you a box, Investigator Brunel. Can you tell me what's located in that box?
I can tell you that without opening the box, I can tell you that it is the same box that contains the Taurus 357 Magnum revolver. This is the same serial number that is on one of the state's exhibits in this photograph. This is my handwriting, my chain of custody information, so to speak, over here on the right-hand side. This is the arrow that I drew whenever I wanted to indicate to crime lab personnel which way the barrel was pointing when they opened the box up. This is a evidence label that was affixed. This is evidence tape that we put on the box, and then this is the crime lab's own seal and barcode information. It appears to be that particular firearm.
Your Honor, we'd ask that be marked as state's next exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection.
Be marked as 40.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be allowed to open that and inspect it and make sure that it's the same firearm as well.
You have scissors?
Yes, sir.
Always get another. It's after lunch. Any of the jurors need an afternoon stretch. You know, sometimes people get sleepy. You do just stand up for a second. Okay.
Your Honor, may I remove it from the box? So this indeed is the firearm that was used, and there are seven empty cartridge holders in the cylinder, and this is the same serial number for the firearm in the photographs and depicted on the box. I removed it from the box because I just don't point firearms at people unless I know they're unloaded.
Which is also why I don't want to publish that to the jury. I don't want to pass it around while we're talking.
Correct.
But I did notice, Mr. Brunel, that you made sure you cleared it to make sure that there was nothing in that weapon.
Correct.
Before you opened that box.
Correct.
You mentioned earlier that there were projectiles found in Miss Smiley.
Correct.
Could you tell the ladies? Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Thank you. You mentioned earlier that there were projectiles recovered from Ashley Smiley's body.
Yes, ma'am.
In the course of your investigation, did you learn where those projectiles were found?
Yes, ma'am.
Permission to approach witness. I'm gonna leave them both up here.
Okay.
May we approach?
Yes, sir. Overruled at this time, but pending further objection.
Investigator Burnell, the first item I handed you that was bagged, do you have any personal knowledge through your course of this investigation what that bag was?
Oh, I'm sorry. I simply know what these items are due to the crime lab reports that we received via our results.
Yeah, we're gonna make
Sustain.
Yes, sir.
You want to mark them Friday?
Yes, I would like to have them marked for ID.
All right, mark it S41 and S42 for ID purposes only.
Investigator Burnell, you talked about there were other items of evidence. I want to talk about at some point when you arrived on the scene, the defendant was not in the home.
Correct.
While you were there and you were processing the crime scene, at some point was she taken into custody?
Yes, ma'am.
Walk us through what you learned about that and what your next steps were.
So essentially, while I was photographing doing the crime scene photography, for lack of a better term, multiple units from the sheriff's office. We have a narcotics task force with the Rankin County Sheriff's Office, Madison Police Department, Madison County Sheriff's Office, that also includes somewhat of an intelligence liaison. And so with that intelligence liaison, we have access to drones and robots and other type of resources that essentially provide us remote surveillance capabilities and things along those lines. We're also in touch with the Mississippi Highway Patrol to obtain the services or to obtain the resources related to their helicopter. Because we essentially established our inner perimeter around the crime scene. We were staging officers around the area in somewhat of a loose perimeter, so to speak, to keep Miss Gregg from getting north or south of Old Fannin Road, getting outside the Farmington subdivision, which is where 214 Ashton Way is located in Rankin County, Mississippi. But through the course of that time, one of our interdiction officers radioed in that he had obtained he had taken into custody the 14-year-old suspect in this case. And it was clarified through one of the patrol supervisors that that was the suspect we were looking for, and he confirmed that it was. She was brought to the scene where Investigator Davis took a gunshot residue kit, which is essentially like a couple of dowels in an envelope. Those dowels are used in order to collect gunshot residue. They're submitted to the Mississippi Crime Lab in order to test for the presence of someone having fired a firearm recently.
Did you actually observe Investigator Davis perform a portion of that?
A portion of it, yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Investigator Burnell, are you familiar with what I've just handed you?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you have personal knowledge of what's in that envelope?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell me what that is?
So this is a gunshot residue kit that we issue out to our investigators. It bears Carly Gregg's name, Investigator Davis's badge number, name, our agency name, the case number, the chain of custody information, and then it has our evidence signature, our evidence thing on it. Inside of this are the little metal dowels that I was telling you about a second ago that essentially are used to rub on the skin. They're used to rub on surfaces in order to determine the presence of this gunshot residue.
Other than the markings from the Mississippi Crime Lab, does that appear to be altered in any way?
Your Honor, we're going to have to check on that if I'm incorrect.
Yes, sir. For ID purposes only at this time. Y'all approach.
What I mean is, what is that?
It's a gunshot residue kit.
And who was that gunshot residue kit performed on?
Carly Madison Gregg.
And I believe your testimony was that you observed part of that gunshot residue
Correct.
testing. Or we'd ask that this be marked as State's Exhibit next.
Any objection?
No objection.
Be admitted. That's 43, all purposes.
Investigator Burnell, what other testing are you aware of or that you have personal knowledge of that occurred on the defendant that day?
That day, the gunshot residue kit was collected from her. She was photographed after she was brought to the scene. And when I say she was photographed head to toe, including hands, front and back. Her clothes were later taken and collected as evidence and kept.
Mayor Pro Tem Sean. Investigator Burnell, who's in that photograph?
Carly Madison Gregg.
And is that the same Carly Madison Gregg that you observed on the scene on March the 19th, 2024?
Yes, ma'am.
That's after she'd been taken into custody.
That's correct.
Or we'd ask that that be marked as State's next exhibit.
Any objection? No objection. Be admitted. That's 44, all purposes.
Investigator Burnell, earlier we introduced some photographs of some vape pen boxes. Did you actually remove those items from the home as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And I think you said also along with a knife of some sort.
Correct.
Permission to approach the witness stand. Investigator Burnell, does that appear to be the items, including the vape pen boxes and the multi-tool or the knife that you removed from the home that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that appear to be altered in any way from the day that you took it?
No, ma'am.
All right, we'd ask that that be marked as State's next exhibit.
Any objection? Be marked. That's 45, all purposes.
You were tasked with processing the crime scene in this case, right?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And when you got there, you said there was one deceased victim.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that that is exhibit. Mayor Pro Tem. Looking at exhibit 36, could you tell me if that is the position of Ashley Smiley when you found her laying in the floor dead of Carly Gregg's bedroom?
When I initially entered the room, no, ma'am. So the towel had been placed back on her face. And then for the purposes of photographing her body unobscured, because at that point in time, we weren't sure who had put the towel on her face until the investigation progressed and continued. So the towel was removed and she was photographed.
The next exhibit, number 36.
37?
37, sorry about that, 37. Is that Ashley Smiley?
Yes, ma'am.
Based on your investigation and your training in crime scenes, what does it appear that has happened to Miss Smiley in that photograph?
So it appears as though she sustained 3 different gunshot wounds to the head. So these 3 these 2, one here and then another here, essentially were shot from distance. The one down here under the chin, you can see a what is referred to as a stippling on the skin, so when I took that certified investigator's course, through the state, we go into what close contact gunshot wounds looks like. In this particular case, so anything close contact is considered 36 inches and less. So here you can see the stippling in the skin just under the chin, but essentially what you have there is burnt powder. When it exits the muzzle of the firearm, it lands on the skin because it doesn't have the distance in order to spread out and burn up before it makes contact with any of the surface. And so it makes contact with skin and essentially burns the skin.
Commissioner President Sharner, I'd ask that these two photographs be published to the jury.
Yeah, I'm with the bailiff. Matricide.
Okay, Burnell, you discussed with us, and now the ladies and gentlemen have seen that photograph. You discussed that only one of the gunshot wounds or defects appeared to have stippling.
That's correct.
And what does that indicate to you?
So the firearm was within about 3 feet of Miss Smiley's head as she was laying prostrate on the floor face up.
After you processed the crime scene that day, what other involvement did you have directly with this case?
So after we concluded our time on scene and we took our evidence to the sheriff's office to begin the task of logging it into evidence, photographing it prior to packaging, photographing the packaging, making sure that it was stored for later submission to the Mississippi Crime Lab, and stored for purposes of court proceedings and things along those lines. And when I say we, Investigator Cotton, Zachary Cotton, and I, Deputy Hunter Lewis and Deputy Dustin Smith, they were doing their initial reports for their response to the scene that day, while Investigator Cotton and I were handling the evidence packaging and things along those lines. During that particular time, we had concluded the evidence portion, and Mr. Smith had actually come over to discuss the court trial that we were actually in that week. And Investigator Smith heard a knock on our front door and went forward to see kind of what was going on, if somebody needed our assistance or kind of what was happening. And a father made him aware that his daughter had actually been there that day with Miss Gregg, and that he was bringing her forth as a witness.
At that time, did you, excuse me, did you participate in an interview of that child and her father?
I did, yes, ma'am.
And based off of what you learned, what did you learn from that interview?
Am I allowed to say her name or just her initials? She was identified as Brooke Wafer. She was, her father and her cousin accompanied her to the sheriff's office that day. We brought them into an interview room. She was essentially a peer and a schoolmate of Carly Gregg's. They both attended Northwest Rankin, and she essentially told us, and we were being very careful in our interviewing of her, simply until we could gain guidance the following date about whether or not we needed to obtain the services of the Child Advocacy Center. The Child Advocacy Center simply stands as a neutral party in order to forensically interview children, whether or not they are victims or witnesses that have experienced traumatic events in life. And so,
Investigator
Yes, ma'am.
Purnell, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with the fact that Rankin County has a protocol in place about the age of certain witnesses?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And is that why your office wanted to make sure that it was okay for the sheriff's department to, in fact, interview this child because she was 16 at the time?
Correct. So anybody 17 and under, we usually try and obtain some guidance as to whether or not CAC interview will be necessary. Considering Miss Wafer's maturity and her chronological age, we went ahead and conducted an interview with her at a later date, which was more detailed in nature. But for the purposes of the initial interview that night, she essentially stated that Miss Gregg had contacted her, said that it was an emergency, she needed to come by the house. Her father drove her to that particular location like he had done times before, and dropped her off. I believe he said it was about 5 o'clock. And so we continued interviewing her, trying to ask generalized questions. What did you do when you got there? Miss Gregg met her at the front. Miss Carly Gregg met her at the front door, and essentially asked her, "Do dead bodies make you squeamish?" And she said, "No, I don't think so." And Miss Gregg proceeds to take her back to to her own bedroom, where her mother's body lie deceased at that point in time. And so she stated that during this point in time, Miss Ashley Smiley, already had the towel on her face. Her arms were in a fixed position across her torso, and that Miss Gregg had a silver revolver. I believe she identified the handle as being brown instead of black, that black rubberized grip, but stated that it was a very large very large revolver type firearm. And then shortly after that, she told Miss Wafer that Miss Gregg told Miss Wafer, "It's like I shot my mom 3 times, and as soon as my stepdad gets home, I got 3 shots for him." Shortly thereafter, she was asked if she wanted to wait in the backyard. She said she did. Went out the back door that was described to you a second ago, next to the dog kennel, and waited. Once Mr. Smiley arrived home, she heard 3 shots. Miss Wafer stated she heard 3 shots. Miss Gregg ran out the back door, and they both ran around that L shape of the house. There's a privacy fence around this entire backyard. So they come out this door, run around the back of the carport. There's a small shed right here in the yard. Run out this way, jump the fence, run up the driveway, where we later learned that they split off. Miss Wafer went to another friend's house in the neighborhood. Miss Gregg circled back around and went to the Magnolia Point subdivision, which is an adjacent neighborhood to Farmington.
After your presence in the interview with Miss Wafer and her father that night, what was your next involvement in this case, if any?
So I believe my next involvement was on the 22nd. During that initial interview with Miss Wafer, we learned that there were some, I guess I should back up. So the 22nd, we wanted to try and get a copy of Mr. Smiley's phone. Investigator Cotton had been discussing the case with him, trying to get more information with him due to the traumatic nature of what he experienced. A lot of times in my profession, we see what we would like to call traumatic mind. People experience trauma and essentially resolve it, handle it in different ways. The point being, days after that, things begin to come clear because your mind enters a fight, flight, or freeze type of mode. And so as he began to kind of come out of that, Investigator Cotton had talked with him, talked about getting a forensic extraction of his cell phone in order to figure out whether or not there were any messages, because he had received 2 messages that day from Miss Smiley's phone that didn't seem like her. And so we wanted to obtain copies of those text messages. So on the 22nd, we found out that Mr. Smiley had obtained the camera that was within the garage. We had overlooked it during the initial processing of the scene. He had collected it for us, and I had gone by to our investigator Cotton, collected the SD card from him and provided it to me. So during the initial look at that particular memory card, found that all the videos for the 19th were missing. The file folder was in place along with all the other file folders, which aroused some alarm. And so had deputies Lewis and Hunter, they were helping us canvass the area after Mr. Smiley stated that the camera from the kitchen had been missing. So we recanvassed the neighborhood, canvassed Magnolia Point subdivision, essentially trying to locate this camera that was gone. And during that point in time, I had a memory card reader, a little box you plug in your computer and you can read the little memory sticks or the SD cards. Plugged it in, found what I found, and found the videos missing. Went back to the residence with deputies Lewis and Hunter for the purposes of having their body camera to essentially provide some accountability and some transparency to the situation. Had a conversation with Mr. Smiley about the missing videos, and learned that basically he was used to a Microsoft product and was using an Apple product in which to look at the SD card. So when he looked in order to try and preserve the videos on the SD card from the Apple product, he cut and pasted inadvertently instead of copy and paste. And so he allowed me access to his computer. I found the video files that were missing at that point in time, retrieved those, looked into the recycle bin, the trash folder, what have you, on the Apple product, and confirmed that there were no videos in that particular area, which would illustrate to us that he may have been attempting to destroy evidence. We had a conversation with him about the need, if he obtained or if he found or if he recovered any other evidence in the house, not to touch it, not to do anything with it, to call us. We were here to help him in any way we could, and we did not want the inference to be made that he was tampering with evidence, and essentially create a problem with the prosecution of Miss Gregg's case. And so he was very understanding of that particular point. And after we left that particular time, he was later provided that cell phone back that we obtained the extraction of, as well as that SD card after we made a copy of it along with the videos. That was my involvement on the 22nd. We would later go back and do the more detailed interview with Miss Wafer at her parents' house in the Castlewood subdivision.
I, I want to ask you about the conversation with Heath Smiley about the tampering with this physical evidence. Did you ever tell him that you were going to charge him with a crime?
No, ma'am. The inference that I wanted him to understand is that he was a victim of a crime. He, was essentially, he had just lost his wife, a stepdaughter that he had essentially spent a good deal of time with over the past several years, had essentially been fighting for in an embattled custody chancery court issue, and he essentially looked at her like a daughter. And to have this happen to him, we were very understanding in the situation that he was in, but at the same time, we don't want to create problems where there aren't any. We would much rather the victims of the complaints in these situations just leave the evidence alone, call us, hey, look, I found X, Y, and Z. Can you come pick it up, collect it? Not a problem. We'll take care of it. That essentially puts the onus on us. Not Mr. Smiley. It doesn't put it on anybody else. If the evidence is mishandled or if something happens to it, that's my fault. That's my problem. It's not on him. It can't be construed or misconstrued that he is tampering with evidence, that he's doing anything in order to hinder the prosecution of this particular case.
Investigator Burnell, I want to just pick on you a little bit.
Okay.
You're not perfect, right?
No, ma'am. The only infallible person died on a cross for us.
So you would agree with me too that absolutely no investigation is perfect, right?
I would agree with that. Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, I think ladies and gentlemen have heard that while there were multiple deputies and investigators over at Mr. Smiley's residence, you did not know that there was a camera in the garage.
Correct. Completely overlooked it. Yes, ma'am.
Those sort of things can happen from time to time.
I agree. Yes, ma'am.
Does any issues with your investigation, maybe that you missed the camera at first, does anything change with regards to who the shooter was in this case?
No, ma'am.
Does it change the crimes that were committed in this case?
No, ma'am.
And based on your investigation, who in fact was the person who pulled the trigger and shot Ashley Smiley and killed her, shot her 3 times?
Carly Madison Gregg.
And who was the person that either shot Heath or at Heath 3 times?
Carly Madison Gregg.
Court's indulgence. No further questions, Ron.
Y'all still need the break?
Yes.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, let's go ahead and take our mid-afternoon break. If y'all would, go ahead and use the restroom. We'll take about a 15-minute break. Everyone remain seated while the jury exits. All right, the record will reflect we're outside the presence of the jury. We're going to take a recess. You're not to speak to anybody about your testimony. Okay? Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, if you need to use the restroom, bailiff will show you back there to the back. Go to the restroom, come back and sit down. Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, everyone else will be in recess till 2:30.
Here we are. All right, so they are going on recess. Hold on one second. Apologize. So they are going on a recess right now. They're going to be on recess until 2:30. We just heard from on the stand a detective with the Rankin County Sheriff's Office. The detective's name is, make sure that I get this correctly too, Tyler Burnell with the Rankin County Sheriff's Department. So he testified as to his involvement in the investigation. He did investigate or speak to the injuries that Ashley Smiley sustained, the gunshots, where the gunshots were. One thing that he spoke about that was particularly interesting to me listening to it was when he was explaining the gunshot wounds on Ashley Smiley. He spoke about one particular gunshot that had stippling to it. Stippling is burning, whether it be on the clothing or skin, burning from gunshot residue after a gun is fired. So if there's not enough distance between the target and the gun, then stippling can happen. But they said that there was some stippling on one of the wounds, one of the gunshot wounds on Ashley Smiley. What is so interesting about this is from the way that they were able to investigate it and figure out the direction that the gun came or the bullet came from, how the gun was held and everything. They said that the gun was fired at least 3 feet from Ashley Smiley's head as she was laying on the floor face up. So that means that she was shot twice, and as she was laying there on the ground, she was shot again, close range, close enough to cause stippling or burning on her. So that was one thing that I did find interesting. Also, another thing that I found interesting was, we speak a lot of, or not speak a lot, but we're talking a lot about this being an insanity trial. They are going for an insanity defense here. Well, Carly, spoke to her friend that was there, which the investigator, with the judge's permission, gave out her name. But we're going to say her initials, BW, are her initials. But spoke with that friend, that witness, and talking about Carly, stating to her, and which we've known this, we've spoken about this, but saying to her, number one, she got there, are you squeamish around dead bodies, or have you ever seen a dead body? Something along those lines. Carly goes into the home. She shows Carly, Carly shows her mother's body laying in the bedroom. According to the friend, BW, Carly's mother's face was already covered up with a towel, and her hands were in a position like laying across her abdomen. But then when she was talking about she, shot her mother 3 times, had 3 more bullets for her father, it begs the question, does that lead to an insanity defense? Because an insanity defense is something along the lines of you are insane in the moment of that happening, and that does not sound like insanity. If I were on the jury, to me, that would sound different than what an insanity verdict should be. That is what I took away from just hearing his testimony today. From what little bit we heard, State questioned him, and now they are in recess. When they come back from recess, he will take the stand again, and the defense will question him. So you see, we do have movement in the courtroom right now. They are on recess until 2:30 today. And looking here at the comments here, Sheila's asking, they said it's not personal. Where was the stepfather shot at again? So the stepfather was shot in his shoulder right here, and it was close to the neck, but it was in the trap area of his shoulder, and it was a through and through. So it went through the muscle there and came out the backside. So thankfully he was not fatally or more seriously injured in that, but that's where he was shot at, was in the shoulder. Let's see, Tanya saying, but he kept referencing her using her last name. He did. The witness that was just on the stand did. Looking here, Carmen Cook says premeditation. It could sound like that. It's not our job or our role to make that decision. That's going to be up to the jury. But when you think about it into the context of the reason behind an insanity plea, what an insanity plea details, it does sound like that would not fall underneath the realm of an insanity plea. That's how I would view it if I were